Hi, my name is Adrian, and welcome to my journey of growing crystals of sodium chloride, better known as table salt. What started as a simple experiment turned into a fascinating exploration of science and patience. Let me take you through the trials, the problems, and the ultimate triumph of creating beautiful salt crystals. To begin, I tried the simplest way I could think of, adding salt into a container and pouring boiling water into it while stirring. The goal was to create a supersaturated solution, a solution containing more salt than can normally dissolve at a given temperature, exceeding its equilibrium solubility. Once it had reached that point, I poured the solution through a coffee filter into another container to remove impurities. But the crystals formed were tiny. In hindsight, I should have been a little more patient, but it seemed that the solution had cooled too much during the process, making it less effective for crystallization. So I decided to try again with a different approach. This time, I boiled the water in a pot and added salt while it was heating. After filtering the hot solution into another container, something magical happened. Crystals started forming almost immediately. But these weren't the cubical crystals I expected. As I held the container, I noticed the solution sparkling. Tiny crystals were suspended in the solution, reflecting light of all colors in random directions. It was as if there were little auroras, lightning bolts in the solution. Beautiful, isn't it? I didn't get to see the Perseids meteor shower this year, but this was perhaps more mesmerizing than any meteor shower that I could hope for. I realized that I had waited too long to pour the solution, allowing the water to boil away and crystallization to accelerate in the pot. A happy accident, I guess. For my third attempt, I tried to replicate the sparkling effect, but poured the solution before it started to boil vigorously. I was rather disappointed at first, as I couldn't see the sparkling effect, but crystallization still started quickly, and this time the crystals were square. I was thrilled to see the characteristic shape of sodium chloride crystals that I was looking for. I decided to call it a day. By the next day, the crystals had settled at the bottom of the container. They were square, but more opaque and less defined than before. I decided to try again. This time, I took a time lapse of the crystals forming. Watching the usually slow process in fast motion was amazing. It looked almost like those simulations of galaxies forming you get from NASA. Here's a single floating crystal that was clearly square. Later, I found a blog post by Chase from Crystalverse detailing a technique for growing clear sodium chloride crystals. Link in the description below. The method involved making a supersaturated solution and letting it sit for a day to reach perfect saturation by allowing excess salt to crystallize out. This solution was then poured gently into another container and left to evaporate slowly. Not all batches were successful, but eventually I got some beautiful crystals. They weren't very large, but to grow bigger ones you could use a seed crystal in a fresh batch of saturated solution. Unfortunately, I ran out of time to try this step. Growing crystals has always fascinated me. As a child, I attempted to grow salt crystals using a guide in my encyclopedia, but never achieved great results. Revisiting this experiment now, as a physics undergraduate, brought back fond memories and a renewed excitement for learning. Now for the science. Sodium chloride forms a face-centered cubic crystal structure, where each sodium ion is surrounded by 6 chloride ions and vice versa. This arrangement is highly symmetrical, and its unit cells are cubical, which is why sodium chloride crystals tend to grow into cubic shapes. The diagonal lines visible on the crystals likely represent growth fronts, patterns formed from the crystal's growth process as it expands from its nucleation site. These fronts reflect the external growth dynamics rather than the internal crystal lattice, which remains highly ordered and cubical in shape. If the crystallization is rapid, it can incorporate impurities and form numerous jagged and uneven crystals. This resulted in the sparkling effect we saw earlier. If the crystal is grown slowly, but the evaporation rate is too high. The crystals are cubical, but opaque, due to air bubbles and dust trapped inside. And only when the evaporation rate is slow enough that one gets clear cubes. But even then, temperature, the humidity, and even the concentration of the salt solution has to be almost perfect, as sodium chloride crystals are really sensitive to growing conditions. What started as a simple experiment turned out to be a masterclass in patience and perseverance. Growing sodium chloride crystals was a journey filled with unexpected discoveries and learning. I hope that after watching me grow my crystals, you feel encouraged to try it out for yourself as well. Chase's blog, Crystal Burst, again linked in the description, contains detailed instructions on how to grow your own sodium chloride crystals and is a good place to start. Thank you for joining me on this journey.